All right, fellas, we are 1 minute away. 1 minute. Stand by, please. Keep an eye out for my go cue in the chat. Stand by.
I prefer doing this live. I don't know about you, Waleed.
Oh, absolutely. This is so weird. It's very strange.
We're still in credits.
Yeah, it's a 6-minute credit sequence. Sorry.
And Karen, you're going to be putting that on at the very end, right? Yes.
Go.
Thank you for joining us for tonight's showing of 1982. And thank you so much to our sponsor, the MPZ Law Group. The in-person Teaneck International Film Festival begins this Thursday with A Story of Bones at 7:30 at the Teaneck Cinemas. And we'll have films straight through Sunday night. So we hope you'll join us all weekend long. I'm Eric Goldman, and I'm adjunct professor of cinema at Yeshiva University and host of the show Jewish Cinematheque at JBS TV. So tonight, by the time that 1982 was made, Lebanese filmmaker Oualid Mouaness had produced 30 films and written and directed 2 short films. Here, Oualid took a giant step, writing, directing, and producing 1982, which would be his debut first feature film. And I know that I'm sure that all of you were wowed by this film. In 1982, Oualid brought us back to that year when he was just a 10-year-old going to an English-speaking Quaker school that we watched on screen, the very school that he had attended as a child. The film is very much based on his experiences, and the film garnered the Youth Sidebar Prize at the Cannes Film Festival. Oualid, such a pleasure to have you join us from Los Angeles, where I understand you're working on a new project. Welcome.
Thank you so much. First of all, I want to really thank the Teaneck Film Festival for including this film in this lineup. It's a pleasure. It's an honor also, and I am ecstatic that we are speaking again, Mr. Goldman.
As am I speaking with you.
Yeah.
So we've just experienced an incredible film. This was, as I mentioned, your debut film. How did it come into being? You had really put most of your efforts in producing, and all of a sudden, there you go ahead. And you can only imagine it was not an easy task.
It was not an easy task. It was a necessary task. I mean, I went to film school like most people, and we come out of film school, we produce, we direct, we edit, and I just felt like I needed to be ready to tell the story I want to tell as a director. In the meantime, I built a career also as a producer, as you know. But it was time, and this story was a story that was gnawing on me that I felt needed to be told. And having worked in the industry, I feel like there's hardly ever a human face put to the wars that we've experienced or that we experience. A lot of times films are about the battles, and they're about like trying to take positions. What about the real people? What about us? What about the people who are actually most impacted by the war, whether directly or indirectly, but whose lives are appended? And I just felt I needed to speak to this. Just, I mean, my pacifist self needed to say this very loudly in this film.
You were a child of 10.
Correct.
And it's not as if the war began in 1982. It had begun, what, 5-6 years earlier. And here you are in school, whatever, and we see all of these things going on. What was that? I mean, we get a feel of what that was like from the film, but for you personally, how deeply were you affected? Was this a sort of a therapy for you to try and deal with it on film?
You know, when you're a kid, you don't really, you kind of march on and you have your life, right? And it's complete. And this is what kept us going and kept me going as a kid. Like, I was not particularly an emotional kid. And as kids, we were sort of more alert than the adults. What I realized is that this thing sort of lingered with me, and it sort of affected me more and more and became more emotional as the farther away I got from it, because then I realized and I understood what really happened. Yes, it was therapeutic, and I felt it was necessary. And it's necessary because, you know, supposedly the Lebanese war had ended, and there was never a truce, and there was never a conversation about it, and and to be able to really overcome the past and move forward, you kind of have to look at the past a little bit, and you have to understand it. And this film was sort of emotional and therapeutic for almost everybody who participated in it, particularly during the shoot. I had to tell the story. I had to address it.
Soldiers, survivors have PTSD.
Yeah.
Did you, as a 10-year-old, I mean, you talk about sort of not impacting you at that moment, but it did later on. Was there PTSD that you actually?
I don't know really if I understand PTSD fully in a way, but like, when you realize where you realize PTSD really hits you hard is when things kind of occur again, and you realize they take you back to that moment in your life. And this happened to me later on. As I grew older, something would happen, and it will trigger this memory, and it'll come back to me. Because in the moment, all of us in the moment, whether we're horrified or traumatized or immediately impacted on the spot, we kind of know that when you're living a particular moment in time, you have to plow through that moment and get past it, you know? And it's the strength of humanity, right? Like the fact that we have to we have the ability to fight, and we fight in different ways. In 1982, it's like we fight, and the parents and everybody sort of fights by trying to pretend that life is going on as normal, trying to be as close to normal as possible while the world is completely being upended. And we experienced this in 9/11 in the US, because I was here. And as a matter of fact, that day took me back to 1982, you know, emotionally. So it's that, like, in the moment when things are happening, you just have to make the best decision to move forward and to continue and to stay on purpose for whatever it is at that moment in time. And only later, I feel, is when you really realize how exhausted and how beleaguered you are. I mean, I think that's how PTSD works. You know,
Our audience may or may not know the historical background, what in fact was going on in 1982. Can you sort of give us, there were so many factions. You had the Christians, the Palestinians, the Muslims, the Israelis, the Syrians. Can you just?
oh God, it's realities of the Lebanese war. Yes, well, the Lebanese war started in 1975, and it started, and there were many different phases to that war. At one point, this faction was fighting the Palestinians. At one point, the Christians were fighting the Christians. The Muslims were fighting the Muslims. Like, everybody, like, fought everybody. But up until that moment in time, it was Lebanon has a lot of like factions, and they're mostly sectarian. Like, there were 3 Christian factions, and there were like 2 Muslim factions at the time. And you had the PLO, and then you had the ideological left and the ideological right. And they all took sides. You know, what was very interesting is, as 1982 converged, like, basically you had the left in the country was sort of supporting the Palestinians because as a cause, as from a humanitarian standpoint, which of course went into the militarized section, became militarized as the war progressed. And then the right was the right invited the Syrians. As a matter of fact, the Christians invited the Syrians in 1976 or 1977 or 78 in order to kind of try to help mitigate the militarization of the PLO at the time in Lebanon. And it's like you never knew who was whose friend at any one point. And what happened is, moving for just in the nutshell, 1982 comes along. The global sphere, the global landscape was unpredictable for Israel and for Palestine and for Lebanon and all of that. And then, of course, enter Israel again, because Israel had done an incursion in 1978 to push the militarized PLO at the time back north of the border, and that wasn't really working. And then basically in 1982, there was basically a plan. What happened is the Lebanese right, which is the Phalange at the time, was working with the Israelis versus the Syrians and the Palestinians, and the left in Lebanon was like on one side. And what happened is Israel was making an incursion. Everybody thought it was going to be a small incursion, except like it just became this total invasion and took over the entire country. And suddenly we were stuck between two behemoths, Israel and Syria.
And we see them in the planes overhead.
Meanwhile, also what is interesting is all of this, of course, all that doesn't happen without impacting the fabric of a society. But what's interesting about the film is because you're contained in a school, like it actually controls the adults, and it forces them to reason rather than to fight. And this is something very important.
But the reasoning was difficult between the two teachers.
Of course, yeah. Of course. I mean, you had Nadine Labaki's character, Yasmin, who was stuck between the man that she's in love with, who's on the left, and who's really about unify. In his mind, the country needs to be unified, whereas the right at the time was feeling very threatened in general. And they were trying to separate themselves from Lebanon and from Lebanese population. It was it was really polemic and polarized. And this is something I witnessed as a kid in the adults, but I didn't understand it. But you would hear and you would be like, oh, the so-and-so's cousin is on this as a leftist, and then he's having to hide, even though he's Christian, but he's in the Christian areas because the Christians were hunting down the people who were leftists in the Christian. I mean, it was really all of that. So all of that, I did not really make sense of it as a kid, but I saw it and I heard it, and it was always spoken about like the elephant in the room. Like you don't talk, like if you ask questions, the questions are like, yeah, so, and you never really got the answer. I came to understand it as an adult. So in representing that conflict and its ambiguity, while at the same time the strength of its polemics, I felt I had to, in the adult narrative, I tried to reflect that same level of ambiguity that I had as a kid. And putting them in the school and having this whole story take place in a school, because the very real part of the story, of course, is the kid's story. But the fictionalized part of the narrative, which actually I think explains a lot, is actually in the adult narrative, which was very difficult to write, because I had to write it. Yeah.
And all of this in a year when you had the assassination of
Bashir Gemayel in September that following year. Yes. And then the massacre, Sabra and Shatila. Yeah.
And you're going to an English language Quaker school.
Yeah. Lebanon had, I mean, a lot of the Middle Eastern countries along the Mediterranean had a lot of like post-colonial schools, which are basically either English or French schools, Jesuit schools, Quaker schools, Protestant schools, missionary schools, and then there were a lot of these schools, and I happened to be in the singular Quaker school, which I was fortunate because that also shielded me from the sectarianism.
And you went to school with Muslims?
Everybody.
Jews?
Everybody. I don't remember. I knew that I had some Jewish students with me in high school, but it was very quiet because in Lebanon you couldn't be very loud at the time, but like they loved the country and they just, I just knew this because they were very close friends. But yeah, but in that moment in time when I was a kid, I mean, that school was very mixed.
The two teachers, who, by the way, were incredible, are well-known and established film directors in Lebanon. And,
Yes, Nadine, actually. Yes. Nadine, who plays Miss Yasmin, she's a film director and she's incredible. She did Capernaum, which was nominated for an Oscar, I think 3 years ago. And then she'd done 2 other films before that, which were very good as well. So
here you are, a first-time director, directing an established director. What was that like? I mean, I would have been petrified.
I regard, I don't know that if we were to change positions, I don't know that you would be petrified if you were sort of prepared and that you're working with a peer. And this was what was beautiful is we we kind of support each other's work in that regard. And one of the main things actually when Nadine walked in during our first meeting, she's like, I just want you to know that I'm an actor and I would need you to feel free to tell me everything, anything. And this was, and as a matter of fact, it was such a beautiful process to work with her as an actor, also having directed, because whenever there were notes and shifts, it was she got it, because as a director, what you look for is you look for details and you look for nuance and you look for literally every inflection, not only in the skin, but every inflection in the voice as well. So this was very important and she got it. And this is what's beautiful and what comes across.
You read about directors casting youth as a nightmare. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in choosing Sam and the other boys and girls?
It was not a nightmare. I mean, kids they'd have the tendency to get bratty and playful if they choose to, and if they want to be difficult, they will be. But to be quite honest, what was really wonderful is every one of these kids was sort of excited to be a part of this project, right? So, and I had to win them over because I had to make them feel like it's not a chore, and I had to make them feel like they're bringing something to the table. I was very lucky, but at the same time, I had spent 2.5 years before that studying children's behavior. I would go to schools. A friend of mine who's actually a casting consultant on the film as well, was teaching drama at different schools, and I would just go and audit his classes as he's dealing with these kids. And sometimes we talk, I'm like, okay, can you just have them improv? Give them the situation, let's see what they improv. So we would do that. So I learned a lot from just observing that and observing playgrounds. So when it came down to when we had to move forward in shooting, we had to move very quickly because kids at that age grow up and change so fast. Even from the beginning of the shoot to the end of the shoot, some of them changed. And I cast a wide net. All the kids are non-professional actors. We saw about 700 kids. From those, we brought down to 150, then to 30. And those I took into a workshop. But it wasn't because of having observed kids so much prior to that, I knew that the workshop cannot be a study school type workshop. It had to be a hanging out. So what happened is we would hang out, we would watch movies. We watched Au revoir les enfants, we watched The Goonies, we watched my short film, My Life as a Zucchini, different things. And then I wouldn't tell the kids what I thought about the kids in these films. I just had them tell me what they thought. So I had them sort of set their own bar, and I trusted their bar. And this was really interesting because I think this empowered them. And what you see on this film is you see kids kind of owning their own performances. I mean, even on the shoot day, I told them, if I ever tell you anything that you wouldn't do in real life or that does not feel right to you, you come and tell me. And so we actually we actually rewrote a lot of the script as I was working with the kids. And we continued to change stuff even during the shoot sometimes. and they were amazing. And the workshop, which was 6 weeks long, also enabled them to develop relationships with each other, which was key, because this is why you feel the synergy of the classes. You feel like that there's different groups of people. You kind of feel the school life because they already knew each other. At that point, they developed relationships with each other. And there were people. I mean, Wissam had a crush, not on Joanna, on the shoot. It was very funny.
Deal with the relationships off screen as well as
Yeah, there were a lot of relationships off screen, and that was that was so much fun. And one day, like, he was going on a date, and I find out that he's going on a date during lunch. He tells one of the casting associates, he's like, I'm going, and I'm like, wait, who are you taking out on a date? So
the last question before I turn it over to the audience and take their questions. You shot this actually at the school where you went to school. I mean, how did they allowed you to come in, and for how long, and how long was the entire shoot?
the entire shoot was 27 days at the school. And yes, I mean, I talked to them prior, like 2-3 years prior. I did scout other schools, but I knew that this would be the school I wanted to shoot at. And they were about to renovate the school, and we're like, no, you can't change the windows, you can't change this, you can't change that. And they agreed. They pushed that off by a year so we could shoot. And we had to shoot during the summer, which is when the school was literally off, which was August, which was the toughest month to shoot when it comes to lighting. So my DP did not have fun with that. It was very difficult to light this film.
DP, for those who don't know what that is?
Director of photography. Yeah. So it was very challenging to light this film and to make it like beautiful. And the skies were white. But what we ended up doing is, so we shot during that period of time, and it was a total of 27 days, and we had a hard out. There was no room for error. Yeah. So
all right, let me now turn it over to the audience. We have a question. Tell us more about Tigran, your childhood hero who saved the day. Would you say that your innocent love and creativity saved you from the trauma then and now?
Yes and no. Yes. I mean, I think as kids, we kind of, I remember when we used to go to bomb shelters. I mean, we would play, we would draw, we would do like all of these things sort of are distractions, right? But at the same time, Tigran for me as a kid was derivative of, we used to watch this anime TV show in Arabic. It's it's Japanese TV show by Go Nagai. It's called Grandizer. We used to watch it in Arabic religiously every Wednesday, and there were different robots in this film. And I was kind of like one of these kids that I was obsessed with creating robots. So I would just keep drawing them. I mean, they weren't really great, but all of that. And then I did write love notes, and I didn't sign them with my name. I signed them with robots, and and I just felt like, okay, and that's pretty much what it is. So at the end, when he comes, I mean, he works on so many different levels for us as adults. For us, from a literary standpoint, it's almost like it's what people call a deus ex machina ending. So that's on its own thing. That's its own thing. But within the story, I mean, Tigran is the character with which he signs his love notes to this girl. Tigran, I mean, she touches his hand. This time she's touching his hand. He's not going after her for the first time. She's basically accepting him. So it's that moment, while at the same time the city is burning, and it's like, and when you create heroes and superheroes, the reason you create them is because you're fantasizing about making the world a better place, about a protector of sorts. So all of these emotions sort of kind of like twine together, fuse into this catharsis. Whether you're an adult or a kid watching this film, I think the takeaway is very different.
Thank you. Next question. Can you explain the significance of the pigeon?
The pigeons in Lebanon and in most countries in the Middle East, and I'm sure there's a lot. We have a culture of homing pigeons, and basically, well, I like animals in films. My previous short, I also had animals. I had chickens, and wolves, and jackals. So I just think one bird, there's a whole battle, like what does the sky belong to? Birds, airplanes, for the homing pigeons to appear at the school, it means they've lost their rooftop. They're seeking a new.
Just explain, for not everyone knows what a homing pigeon does.
Homing pigeons, basically what we have in Lebanon is, and if you see, like we have there, this exists, I know, in Istanbul, in Jordan, in Beirut, where rooftops, there are people who just raise pigeons, and they basically, it's a hobby of theirs. They go up in the afternoon and they just give the pigeons a sign, and the pigeons just kind of go and like fly all around the city in the sky, and then they come back to their home. And that's why and usually they have a thing on their leg, which actually is a colored thing which tells you who the pigeon belongs to, etc. So for homing pigeons to appear somewhere else, it means they lost that rooftop that they went to. So chances are these pigeons are coming from the south, which you see them at the beginning, while at the same time they kind of form a harbinger, like in the literary Shakespearean sense. The first moment you see the pigeons, you see Wissam makes a comment. He's like, "Since when did we have pigeons in the school?" It's kind of like the three witches of Macbeth, where it's like this day is going to be a day unlike any other. And then you kind of feel them also. They've sort of become kind of part of this living landscape of like man versus nature. And at the end, the pigeons do enter the school when the kids leave, so they take over. And this is sort of inspired a little bit by like what I experienced in Beirut after the war ended and the city opened up. There was East Beirut and there was West Beirut, and there was a no man's land in the middle. The no man's land in the middle was literally a forest. Like basically you go into these magnificent old buildings of Beirut, and like marble tile, marble flooring entryways, and you see like trees shooting up through in the middle of these buildings and branching out windows. And it's like, okay, like the moment we move, I mean, we experienced this during COVID very briefly. The moment mankind kind of retreats a little bit or retreats from a space, nature will come and will take over. And this for me is a thing that's like, I feel like nature is way more powerful than us and is way more resilient than us. And at the same time, we don't realize how much we're upending it. So all of that.
The next question is, what happened after that day in the school? Was it total disruption?
Total disruption. We didn't go back to that school that year. As a matter of fact, this was the first time that the bombing kind of took over most of the regions in Lebanon, and then we left the country 3 weeks after that, and then we came back a few years later. In 1986 is when I went back. So,
Lebanon has produced some pretty darn good films the last few years.
Oh yeah.
At the time that you were making this film, you were sort of spending half a year, in Liberia and half a year in Lebanon. And was the government supportive of your work? And did you have total freedom in terms of choice of subject?
I did. I mean, they don't really interfere with the process or the work. I mean, we had to clear the script by them before we even filmed it. So yeah, I mean, luckily, I did not experience this at all. I've had some of my peers who've done amazing work. I mean, we did face a censorship issue after the film, when we wanted to release the film in Lebanon. And the reason we faced a censorship issue goes to the crux of why I made this film, which is basically, they're like, we're gonna rate, they wanted to rate the film at first, like no children under 17, which is equivalent. It's like, what? Yeah. And I had a really fantastic person at the distribution company, and she was like, are you kidding me? And they're like, yes, because we don't want to remember, we don't want to open these wounds. And the reason I made this film is to open these wounds, but to open them gently and softly, so we're able to actually look back without having to shield our eyes and ask ourselves the real questions about what happened back then, so that it doesn't happen again. And the thing is, what happened back then, yes, there's been the battles, the big battles that happened with Israel, and unfortunately that's still going on to this day. And I think Israel is having the same issues that have plagued it for the last 70 years. So it's all the same. Like unless we unpack the past bravely and talk about it. And in Lebanon, we need to do this socially to build a nation. And unfortunately, right now the nation is very split, you know. And the reason is because we didn't talk about what happened, what everybody did to everybody. Like, no, you have to do, I have wronged you, therefore, can we talk forward? And when you make films like this, it's because you're trying to unpack the past in an intelligent way and a little bit removed, so you're able to build forward. And this is, so that's the only thing I confronted. But generally, on the script level, they don't censor. Sometimes when the film is done, if they feel it's too polarizing for them, then they kind of try to really stop it from coming out. But fortunately with this, I mean, we managed to get them to agree. They usually are careful about like you know, if a film they feel is political or implicating someone or something. And I was very careful in writing this, that I kind of wanted to make a unifying film. I didn't necessarily want to point the finger at a single person, but in this film the finger is pointed at everybody, you know.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And at everybody and at nobody.
No, exactly. That's exactly what it is. Because and I really wanted to make that kind of film, that because when someone watches this film, they know, they're like, oh, we belonged on this side. Oh, we belonged on this side. I'm not rubbing it in, but then when you see this and you're like, okay, what was all this about? And when you see it in the context of today, you're like, we have not moved forward in the last 40 years.
So we have to conclude, but I understand that you're now working in LA on a new script and a new film, and all of us wish you much, much success. We know that as a filmmaker at the beginning, you want to keep things sort of quiet, but can you give us maybe 2 sentences to whet our appetites?
To whet your appetites. Well, it does have a little bit of polemics. It's an adaptation of a book titled, a French book, written by a French-Moroccan author. The title is Bilkis, and it's being produced by Ashley Sandberg and Frank Marshall from Kennedy Marshall Company. So I feel very honored actually to have been tasked with this book to adapt. Subject matter wise, it's really, I mean, the crux of it is the story of a woman who's claiming her right to choose how to practice her faith, essentially.
Wonderful. Can't wait to see it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thank you, audience, for joining us for tonight's showing of 1982. Oualid, always a delight and a pleasure to be with you. And special thanks to our sponsor, the NPZ Law Group. The in-person Teaneck International Film Festival, as I mentioned, begins on Thursday with A Story of Bones, and it will be at 7:30 at Teaneck Cinemas, and there'll be films straight through Sunday night. So we hope to see you all weekend long. I'm Eric Goldman. Oualid, again, much, much thanks for joining us from California. And everyone, thank you again, and good night.
Thank you.